My wife's mother sent me a luxury leather wallet for my promotion. The next day, she asked, "Did you love it?" I said, "It smells funny." She laughed loudly and said, "Well, it's fake, just like your career." And then my wife stormed out. We live in Oregon. Well, I do now. At the time, Isla and I were still living in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Portland, in a little two-bedroom bungalow we'd bought 5 years prior. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. I had just been promoted at the financial advisory firm I'd been with for almost a decade. Not an executive suite kind of promotion, but senior enough that I had my own office and a corner view. I was proud of it. It meant stability, recognition, the kind of thing you call home and share over a celebratory dinner. But when I told Isla the news, her reaction was muted. She smiled and said, "That's great, babe," but her voice lacked excitement. She was stirring something on the stove, half distracted, and then she added, "I'll let Mom know." I remember that sentence because it was always Mom first when it came to major news. Isla adored her mother, even when she criticized her cooking, her clothes, her weight. Even when she cut her down in front of people under the guise of jokes. Mireille had a hold on her. Always had. A few days after my promotion, a package arrived at our house. Wrapped in matte black paper with a precise gold ribbon, Mireille's aesthetic to the letter. No handwriting on the label, of course. Just a typed note tucked inside the box along with the wallet. "Congratulations, Clarence. A real man needs a wallet that suits his title." The wallet was fine. Brown leather, stiff, shiny. Too shiny. The kind of luxury item you see in airport kiosks or clearance racks. I'm not a wallet snob, but I could tell something was off. It didn't feel like real leather, and the smell, it was strong. Not rich leather, but chemical and synthetic, like shoe polish and vinyl glue. I didn't say anything right away, just tucked it into the drawer and stuck with my old wallet for work. But that smell lingered, and when Isla brought it up at dinner that night, I told her the truth. "It smells weird," I said, keeping it light. She didn't respond immediately. Her fork hovered over her plate for a second. Then she gave a short laugh and shrugged. "Well, she did say she picked it up from some boutique in Lake Oswego. Maybe it's just cheap leather." But the next night, at dinner with her mom, things took a turn. Mireille's home was exactly what you'd expect from someone who treated appearances as a form of currency. Pristine, cold, everything color-coordinated and sterile. I never felt welcome there. She never said it, but she never had to. Her disdain was always just under the surface. She didn't like that I wasn't from an elite family, that I didn't work in law or medicine, that I didn't come from money or have a string of degrees to toss around at parties. She tolerated me, sure. But the wallet, that was her jab. She waited until the duck had been carved, until the wine was poured, until the conversation had thinned out to background chatter. "So," she said suddenly, smiling across the table, "did you love the wallet?" I glanced at Isla. She looked away. "I mean, it smells kind of funny," I said. Mireille burst into laughter. Loud, theatrical, like I had delivered the punchline to a joke. "Of course it does," she said, setting her glass down. "It's fake, just like your career." She said it with such ease, so matter-of-fact, that I didn't even fully process it until Isla stood up. She didn't speak, just grabbed her purse, kicked off her heels, and walked straight out the front door, barefoot down the driveway. I followed, calling her name, but she didn't respond. She got in the car, slammed the door, and stared ahead. I slid into the passenger seat and said nothing. We drove home in silence. The next morning, she didn't mention it. She made coffee, packed a small overnight bag, and told me she was going to visit her sister in Chicago. "I just need some space," she said, tying her hair up. "For how long?" "I don't know." There was nothing in her voice. No emotion, just fatigue. I didn't stop her. Part of me wanted to fight, to ask how she could leave over something so petty. But the truth is, it wasn't petty. It wasn't about the wallet or even about Mireille's comment. It was about everything that had come before it. It was about the years of little things. Mireille criticizing how I dressed, where we lived, the fact that I cooked dinner most nights. About Isla never defending me when her mother joked that I was soft, or not really a man's man. About being made to feel like an accessory in my own life. Isla stayed gone longer than expected. We spoke a few times, short calls, mostly logistics. Then, after 2 months, I got served. Divorce papers. No explanation. No, we need to talk. Just a clean, efficient exit. I threw myself into work. I needed something to fill the space she left behind. I stopped going to the house and rented a small apartment closer to downtown. Started therapy. Made peace with the idea that I might never understand why Isla chose to leave the way she did. But I never forgot what Mireille said. At first, I wanted revenge. But as time passed, that feeling dulled. What replaced it wasn't anger, it was curiosity. So I started asking around. I found out that Mireille's real estate firm had been struggling. Quietly. Not failing, but floundering. A few key deals had fallen through. Staff turnover was high. There was a rumor that her leadership was erratic. I had been investing more of my time and money into real estate myself. Small flips, rental properties, commercial spaces. A former client of mine from the finance world was expanding aggressively in Portland and needed a silent partner. I said yes. And then one day, my company made an offer to acquire Mireille's firm. She wasn't happy, obviously, but her board pressured her. There was too much debt on the books, and our numbers made more sense. Within 6 months, the merger was complete. Mireille's title? Advisory consultant. A nice way of saying, thank you for your service. Here's the door. I never once spoke to her during that time. I never showed up at meetings. Never signed a single document in front of her. But I made sure she got the memo. Literally. The announcement was sent on our new company letterhead with my name in the executive list. A week later, I got a single email from Isla. No greeting. Just one line. She knows. She hasn't spoken to me since. I guess the wallet was more valuable than she thought. After that email, I stared at my laptop screen for what felt like an hour. I didn't know what I was feeling. Satisfaction? Closure? Regret? It was like I was reading a line from a stranger. The tone was unfamiliar, cool, distant, with a bitter edge I'd never seen in Isla. But there was something else beneath it. Resentment, maybe, or realization. I never replied. I didn't feel the need to. For the first time in years, I was completely free of their orbit. Mireille's name started disappearing from everything slowly. The firm's social media channels were rebranded. Her nameplate at the old downtown office came down. Internally, she still held a strategic advisor position, but she wasn't invited to the executive retreat in Tahoe. She was no longer on email chains. Her calls were routed through an assistant she didn't know. The kind of slow erasure that can only happen when you built your empire on fear and intimidation, when no one's left to fight for your seat at the table. Word got out, of course. Portland isn't that big when it comes to business circles. Real estate agents and developers started whispering about what happened at DuPont Realty. They said Mireille was taking time away for health reasons, but I heard from someone inside the company that she'd had a full meltdown in a conference room after a partner called me the new head of things. That wasn't exactly true, but close enough. I didn't want to be the guy, but I was now a guy, one whose name mattered more than it used to. And not because I had crushed someone, but because I'd finally started making choices that weren't filtered through someone else's judgment. Around that time, I ran into an old friend of Isla's at a charity event. Kayla. She had always been kind to me, even when it was clear she was Mireille's informant in Isla's life. She was standing by the silent auction table, sipping something red, when she spotted me and gave a nod. I heard about the acquisition, she said. Mireille's not doing well. I kept my response neutral. I hadn't heard. She's been. Kayla paused, swirling her wine. Unraveling. She's not used to being out of control. And Isla, she won't talk about it. Not to anyone. I nodded slowly. I'm not sure what there is to say. Kayla studied me, then said something that stuck with me. You know, I don't think Isla ever really saw how bad it was. Not until that dinner. I didn't ask her to explain. I knew exactly what she meant. Isla had always defended her mother, minimized her comments, brushed off the insults, found ways to justify her behavior. But that night, when Mireille reduced me to a punchline over duck and rose, something cracked. She saw it, finally. Maybe too late. My own life had started to stabilize. I moved again, this time to Bend, a few hours outside of Portland, where the pace was slower and the houses had space to breathe. I bought a place on the outskirts of town. Nothing huge, but it had a view of the mountains and a back deck big enough for quiet mornings with coffee and the paper. I kept busy, split my time between overseeing projects, managing investments, and helping consult for smaller financial firms that needed restructuring. Work had become more than just a paycheck. It was proof. I didn't talk about the divorce much. People asked, of course. Friends, coworkers, neighbors. Things just didn't work out, I'd say. They rarely asked more than that. Middle-aged people get it. You don't always need to explain the slow death of a marriage. Sometimes it just fades. Sometimes it was never fully alive in the first place. One afternoon, nearly a year after the divorce was finalized, I found myself walking through a small art fair in downtown Bend. Nothing fancy, just local artists, pop-up tents, live music, and sunshine. I stopped at a booth selling handmade leather goods. Wallets, belts, purses, and notebook covers. The kind that reek of real craftsmanship. The vendor, a tall guy with a sunburned neck and rough hands, smiled at me and handed me a sample. This is saddle-grade, full-grain leather. None of that bonded crap. I laughed. It caught me off guard. I bought one. A deep brown wallet with hand-stitched edges and a scent that reminded me of old bookstores and clean earth. It cost more than it needed to, but not because it was flashy, because it was real. When I got home, I took the wallet Mireille gave me out of the back drawer, where it had sat all this time. I flipped it over in my hands, studied the cheap stitching, the way the surface had started to peel at the edges, the chemical scent still clinging to it even after all this time. I didn't feel angry anymore, just tired of everything it symbolized. I tossed it in the trash. The real one slipped easily into my pocket, like it had always been there. Life went on. People came and went. I started dating again, slowly, cautiously. No one serious, but I wasn't in a rush. I had friends, a small dog, a quiet life. There was peace in the routines. Mornings at the local cafe, hikes on the weekends, occasional trips to Seattle for work. But Mireille's voice haunted me sometimes. Not in the way nightmares do, but like an old phone ringing in the next room. That ridiculous laugh of hers, the way she said, just like your career. That line became a ghost I carried for months. And slowly, I stopped hearing it. It was replaced with new sounds. The wind in the trees outside my window, the hum of power tools on a rehab property, the bubbling of a French press in the morning. I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't playing anyone's game. I was just living. Summer in Bend was subtle, warm days, cool nights, the kind of weather that makes time feel slower in a good way. I had built a rhythm for myself, a life without pressure, one I didn't have to defend or validate. There was no Mireille, no dinner table ambushes, no feeling like I was performing a role I hadn't auditioned for. Still, there were moments when echoes of the past found their way back in. One evening, I was at a community fundraiser, just a modest gathering at a local brewery, raising money for wildfire relief. I was there more out of habit than anything else. I knew a few people from real estate and construction circles, and being visible in a small town helps when you're trying to stay connected. That's where I saw her. Isla. I caught a glimpse of her through the crowd, standing near the food truck line. She looked almost exactly the same. Same dark hair, same posture, same way she tucked her hands into her sleeves when she wasn't holding anything. But something in her expression was different. She wasn't guarded. She looked ordinary. Not in a bad way, just grounded. Present. She hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I debated walking away. I could have easily slipped out the side door, avoided the discomfort. But something held me there. She spotted me a few seconds later. There wasn't a dramatic gasp or a slow-motion walk across the crowd. No tears, no fury. She just looked at me, blinked like she was registering a familiar face from a place she didn't expect, and then walked over. "Clarence," she said quietly, giving a small nod. "Hey, Isla." We stood in the quiet noise of the event for a moment, neither of us quite sure how to start. Then she asked how I'd been. I told her the truth. Work was good. Life was quiet. She said she'd moved back to Portland 6 months earlier. Things with her fiancé hadn't worked out. She didn't say why, and I didn't ask. "He thought I should go back to school and start over," she said, shrugging. I thought I already had. I nodded. That sounded like something Mireille would have approved of, a fresh start that aligned with her idea of acceptable success. "Your mother's still working?" I asked casually. Isla shook her head. "No. She's sort of retired. Kind of disappeared after the merger." There was a pause, and she glanced away before saying, "She thinks you orchestrated the whole thing to humiliate her." I looked at her, trying to gauge whether she believed that too. "Wasn't personal," I said. "Just business. She happened to be in the way." "I know," she said quietly. "She doesn't." That silence that followed was heavier than anything she or I could say. It wasn't awkward, it was recognition. That things had broken long before either of us admitted it. She didn't ask to meet again. I didn't suggest it. After a minute or two, she gave me a polite smile and said, "Well, take care of yourself. You too." And just like that, she walked back into the crowd. I didn't think about Isla every day after that. I didn't stay up wondering what might have been. But I did carry that conversation with me, turning it over now and then, like a stone you find on a trail and keep in your pocket for no reason at all. What struck me wasn't what she said, it was what she didn't say. She never apologized, never explained, but she didn't justify it either. And that silence was its own kind of answer. We had both been caught in the gravitational pull of someone else's orbit for too long. Mireille had been the real architect of our marriage, in a way. She built the framework. Isla filled in the walls. I just paid the mortgage. And when it collapsed, we all acted like the storm came out of nowhere. But the truth was, the foundation was cracked from the beginning. A few months later, I got a call from one of my former colleagues, now working in a financial law firm that handled high-asset divorces and estate transfers. He asked if I had time to meet about a client who was liquidating some property tied to a trust. I met him at a cafe in downtown Portland. He slid a folder across the table and told me the client had requested full confidentiality but hoped I'd consider bidding. Inside the folder were photos of a multi-unit property near Forest Park. Nice location. High value. A good investment opportunity. The name on the deed? Mireille DuPont. I didn't react. I just closed the folder and nodded. "I'll think about it." He leaned back and looked at me. "You've come a long way, Clarence." I didn't respond. Just took the folder, walked to my car, and sat for a while before driving home. I didn't buy the property. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. Owning her building wouldn't give me anything I didn't already have. Peace doesn't need witnesses. That fall, I took a trip to the coast. Manzanita, small, quiet, rugged. The kind of place where the air always smells like sea salt and pine. I stayed in a rental cabin on the hill, walked the beach every morning with my dog, and read more books in a week than I had in the last 6 months combined. One morning, while sipping coffee on the deck, I saw an older couple walking down the beach. They were holding hands, stopping now and then to point out something in the water. Maybe a seal, maybe just a piece of driftwood. It hit me then, not sadness, not longing, but a kind of calm envy. Not because I needed that specifically, but because I finally understood what I'd been missing for so long. Not love, not companionship, but a life where no one was measuring me against their checklist. The fall passed in a blur of routines and renovations. Back in Bend, I had taken on a project restoring an old craftsman house not far from downtown. The place had good bones, wood beams, original windows, a clawfoot tub buried under decades of grime. I didn't need to flip it. I just needed to bring something back to life. Something I could pour time into, chip away at, make decisions about without permission or compromise. Restoring that house became something close to therapy. I'd come home from meetings, roll up my sleeves, and sand down cabinets or retile a backsplash until my arms were sore and my head was quiet. There was something about the process that made me feel human again. Maybe because houses don't judge. They don't laugh at your ambitions or compare you to other people's sons-in-law. They just ask to be taken care of. I hadn't spoken to Isla again since that brief run-in at the fundraiser. She was still living in Portland, I'd heard, working at a nonprofit now, something involving community outreach. Someone mentioned she'd gone back to using her maiden name. That struck me more than I expected. It wasn't the name change itself. It was what it meant. A clean slate. A rewriting. A pulling away from everything we had shared, even if most of it was shaped by her mother's shadow. I didn't hold it against her. I understood. But I also knew that the woman I married might never have existed without Mireille pulling the strings. And now that she was free of that influence, I sometimes wondered who she was becoming. I got another email from Isla in late November. No subject line. Just one sentence. She's selling the lake house. That was it. The lake house. It was a modern A-frame cabin out in Wallowa Lake, east of the Cascades. Remote, glass walls, stone fireplace, winter snow like something out of a postcard. It had been Mireille's favorite escape, the one place she didn't poison with cold critiques or tight smiles. I only went once. Early in our marriage, before the sharp edges had fully emerged. Isla used to say she wanted to retire there someday. I want to be an old lady in a rocking chair watching elk walk through the trees, she'd tell me, half laughing. And now it was being sold. I didn't reply to her message, but I thought about it all day. I imagined Mireille packing up the place, boxing books she never read, folding throws she never used. I imagined her walking from room to room, realizing the things she valued had no roots without people to admire them. Money, titles, luxury, none of it means much in a place meant for stillness. A few days later, out of some inexplicable impulse, I looked up the real estate listing. It was there, Wallowa Lake Cabin, 3BR, 2BA, price to move. No mention of the previous owner. A simple description, just the specs and a few wide-angle photos. But there was one picture, taken from the back deck, with the trees just starting to frost over. That made something twist in my chest. Not regret, not longing, just an ache for how much had been wasted trying to impress people who were never going to be impressed. Winter settled in early that year. The first snow came in December, powdering Bend in white and casting long blue shadows across the hills. My house project was coming together. Walls painted, floors refinished, kitchen gleaming in the kind of quiet satisfaction you only get when your own hands did the work. I'd started hosting small dinners with friends, people I'd met through work or community events. No pressure, just food, music, wine. Conversations that didn't revolve around business cards or social status. We'd gather around the fire pit, share stories, talk about aging parents, dating in your 40s, how weirdly satisfying it is to buy matching dish towels. One night, during one of those dinners, someone brought a woman named Mel. Early 40s, independent contractor, worked on historic building preservation. She was sharp, dry-humored, with the kind of easy presence that made everyone relax without realizing it. We talked for a while, nothing heavy, just work and music and the best coffee shops in the area. She had this habit of looking people directly in the eye when they spoke to her, not in a challenging way, but like she was actually listening. She didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer it. But I found myself thinking about her days later, unprovoked. That hadn't happened in a long time. Around the same time, I heard that Mireille had left Oregon. It came through a client who used to rent office space from one of her old properties. Apparently, she'd sold her last remaining investments in the area and bought a condo in Scottsdale. Something about the climate, or being closer to an old friend from college. No official farewell, no big announcement. Just gone. Vanished from the place she spent decades trying to dominate. I couldn't picture her in Arizona. The heat, the muted colors, the slow pace. Mireille always needed cold surfaces and sharper air, like she thrived on discomfort. Hers and everyone else's. But maybe she was finally tired too. Or maybe she realized there was nothing left to hold power over. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel much at all. I thought about sending her a card. Just a blank one with a photo of Mount Hood or the Portland skyline. No message. No name. But I didn't. She wouldn't have appreciated the irony anyway. By the time New Year's rolled around, the only thing left from my old life was a photo. It was tucked in a box I hadn't opened in years. Me and Isla on our wedding day, standing under a tree wrapped in white lights. Her smile was softer back then. My hairline, a little better. We looked like people who believed the version of love we were sold. I kept the photo, not out of sentimentality, but because it reminded me of the version of myself that tried, that wanted to build something with someone, that bent and compromised and endured because I believed it would pay off. It didn't, but that version of me mattered too. And without him, I wouldn't be here. The new year arrived quietly. No parties, no champagne. Just a brisk evening on the back deck, a wool blanket over my lap, a glass of red wine in one hand, and my dog curled up at my feet. I didn't miss the noise or the obligatory resolutions. I had already done the hard work of restarting, and I wasn't looking for fireworks. I wanted peace, and I'd finally carved out a life that gave it to me. But life has a way of circling back. Late January, I received a letter. Not an email, not a phone call. A letter, written on heavy cream-colored stationery with slanted cursive that looked like it belonged in another era. It was from Mireille. It wasn't long. Just 3 short paragraphs. Clarence, I assume you've heard I've stepped away from my business ventures. I won't pretend it was entirely voluntary. I see now the world is changing, and not everyone values legacy the way I believed. You were smarter than I gave you credit for. And, for what it's worth, I regret how I treated you. I lost more than just my firm. If you choose not to respond, I understand. There was no signature. Just a simple M. I read the letter twice, then folded it and set it on my desk. It sat there for days, like a paper ghost. It didn't move me in the way Mireille might have hoped. It wasn't sincere enough to feel redemptive, nor venomous enough to provoke anger. But it confirmed something I had always suspected. Losing wasn't in her vocabulary, until I taught it to her. That spring, Mel and I began seeing more of each other. It wasn't dramatic or overly romantic, just the steady unfolding of something real. Sunday mornings at the farmer's market. Long walks with the dog. Occasional project collaborations. Her pace matched mine, measured, quiet, confident. She never pried into my past, but one night, after we'd spent the evening restoring an old mirror frame in my garage, I told her the story. The wallet, the laugh, the remark, Isla storming out, the slow unraveling. She listened, then nodded and said, "You know, you didn't beat her by taking her business. You beat her by letting go of the version of you she made." That landed like truth always does, simple and sharp. In early summer, I got a call from a mutual acquaintance of mine and Isla's. A former client, now a board member at the nonprofit where Isla worked. "She's doing great work," he said. "But I thought you should know, her mother is trying to join the board." I could hear the discomfort in his voice. "She's being pushy," he added. "She wants to fund a whole wing of the outreach program. But there's resistance. People remember how she ran DuPont." I didn't offer much. Just a polite, "Good to know." But a few days later, I made a quiet phone call to someone I trusted on that board. Someone I'd mentored in the early days of their career. I didn't have to say much, just enough to plant a seed. That maybe letting Mireille back into a place that existed to serve vulnerable people wasn't the best move. That maybe someone who used manipulation as a leadership strategy wasn't the ideal face of a charitable initiative. I didn't need to beg. I simply told the truth, politely, without malice. The board voted against her nomination the following month. Her generous donation was returned. The nonprofit issued a vague press release thanking her for her interest, but stating the board had unanimously decided to retain its current structure and vision. That last part, unanimously, was a choice. A public one. I didn't gloat. But that night, Mel brought over wine, and we toasted. "To ethical boundaries," she said. "To fake wallets," I replied, grinning. A few weeks later, I was standing in line at a bakery downtown when I saw Isla again. She was alone, holding a latte, wearing that oversized coat she used to wear in the fall. She saw me and smiled. Not a sad smile, not a bitter one. Just acknowledgement. We chatted briefly. She told me she'd heard about her mother's board rejection. "She blames you, of course," she said. I raised an eyebrow. Was I wrong? She shook her head. "No, you weren't. I think she needed to learn she can't just buy her way back into power." There was a pause, and then she added, "She told me once that the wallet was a test." I looked at her, surprised. She said she wanted to see how you'd react to being insulted in public. That if you couldn't handle her, you couldn't handle her daughter. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it made too much sense. "Then I guess I passed," I said. Isla didn't argue. Instead, she looked out the window and said, "I think she always thought you'd be grateful to have us. That you'd tolerate anything just to stay." "But I didn't," I said. "No," she said. "You didn't." We didn't talk much after that. No dramatic farewell, no what-ifs. We both had lives to return to. But as I walked away, I felt it, the final piece click into place. That summer, I sold the last of the rental properties I'd acquired during the merger years. I didn't need them anymore. I had enough. More than enough. I kept the craftsman house. Moved in fully. Planted a garden. Built shelves. Learned how to make sourdough. Life slowed in the best way. Mel moved in 6 months later. No ceremony. Just a mutual decision over breakfast one morning that this, whatever this was, felt right. And one day, as I was clearing out a box from the attic, I found that old wallet. The luxury, leather one Mireille had sent me. I held it in my hands, studied the peeling edges, the faint fake sheen, the smell that still lingered, synthetic and bitter, like a reminder of something that never was. And for the first time, I didn't feel insulted by it. I just felt free. So I walked outside, tossed it into the trash bin, shut the lid, and went back inside to a home no one else had designed for me. The kind of life no one could fake. The kind of revenge that didn't need to scream. Just whisper, I'm still here. And I won.